If you want to know the truth, there are actually two realities. The reality that everyone's mind knows about, and then a relatively obscure, high-ranking reality. And of course, the mind dismisses this, insisting there can only be one reality. One man started off eating plain, simple food, then moved on to consuming more complex and exotic fare. He later became more conscious and returned to his original menu. If something inside you says regarding this, I don't get it, it will be thinking, saying that. News from the circus. The act was known as Scaramouche and Scaramanger. It had no affection and it had no anger. It was the act of liberation, the freeing of one's own audience from its attraction to old acts. And from the music world comes the story of a certain blues singer whose thinking was so entangled in his inability to read that even when accompanied only by a blind pianist, he had always hold a lead sheet in his hand. Can you, in tales such as these, hear a telling of the mind's tacit awareness of its limits in thought when measured by the boundlessness of non-preferential, stark consciousness? Let it be that all we see ain't all there be. Sex can be a good metaphor for life, and then those who badmouth sex badmouth life. For when it is you in the middle of a new and exciting sexual adventure, there is nothing in the whole world that is more enjoyable, and anything that others might critically say about your involvement therein could not be of any less interest or effect. So, when it's good and fresh, live like you fuck. After revealing to his father his involvement in activities he suspected the elder might find questionable, and receiving from him in reply a silent stare, a son so asked, "You think I should not be doing this?" To which the father replied, "If you do not think that you shouldn't, then what difference does it make what I think?" The struggle to become newly and independently conscious is like learning the same one lesson over and over and over again. Even in a dark room with no mirrors, the mind still sees out and looks at things visible. One man says he's grown so weary of being but one of twins that he would consider the murder of his other half if he could but see how it would not do also him harm. One man cleaned out his library and revised his reading list by deleting therefrom any works having to do with God or a person's inadequacies, replacing them with a gain in weight that you couldn't see. Just, he said, you wait and see. When meeting people for the first time, this one man would extend a hand and say, "My name's Fontenoy," then pointing to his head add, "And this is Fontenoy's complaint." When the telling of this little story about him elicits no laughter, he often says, "Well, you had to be there. But of course you were lucky and weren't, whereas I wasn't and was." Again, pointing to his head. One man says that all his world travels in both directions have taught him, if anything, never to shoot an elephant with diarrhea or try and push away an overflowing glue pot. And he reminds you that his lessons were learned from travels, both external and otherwise. What could be, what should be, the final word on captivity? You are in prison if you don't know you're in prison. A voice from the rear one day called out, "We're all on drugs on this bus." And someone up front mused, "What does he think this bus is, other than drugs?" In his struggles to become consistently conscious in a new area of his brain, one lad was moved to ask his father, "Is not caring the same as not feeling?" And the elder replied, "If you have to ask this question, you're not yet ready to deal with the situation." And the boy's head instantly bobbed with recognition as he mused how such was always the case. As his understanding of the effort became clearer, one man realized, it's not simply my own thinking that I'm arm wrestling with. It's no less than life itself across the table from me. At certain times, to himself, one man would internally cry out, "Help! I'm being held captive by a crazy relative." A correspondent writes, "Got a joke for you. What is a mystic? A mystic is someone who's more intelligent than average, someone with more talents than most, someone with no serious health problems, someone with no real financial concerns, all this, and is still not satisfied." Some joke, huh? Fame. If fame was more like this, I might be more interested in it, says one guy. A reporter asked a well-known celebrity what was the best part about being famous, and he replied, "The weather's much nicer now." In the areas above the mere survival level, one man's view regarding the matter of sight is as follows. If you can see it, it's not worth seeing. One man said to his son, "Look, if you're going to think anyway, at least think the opposite of what you were going to think." Simple fact time. Everything visible is sticky. One day a man said to life, "If I'd known you were going to take sides and have favorites, I would have never bothered to play." And life immediately shot back, "I don't take sides." And the man cried out, "Aha! I knew I could make you talk." A pretend mystic responded to some criticism with a blistering assault, ridiculing his accuser mercilessly. And a real mystic, overhearing it, said, "Ouch!" A comment the pretend one cheerfully grabbed for his own, saying, "Yeah, I really showed him up for what he is, huh?" "No, yourself." When one man heard that the most common health complaint was about lower back pain, he asked his thinking if it would like to take a little trip. The ultimate problem with, but the intellectual pleasure from, metaphors is that they deal in things visible. If constantly, over an extended period of time, the mind thought only about itself, it would be impossible for it not to realize its true nature. To think only of thinking, to be mindful only of the mind. There was once a planet that was populated by creatures that we would probably call cows, if we had seen them. They were the creature of the planet. And being similarly herd-driven animals as they are here on Earth, they hung out in large groups all over the planet. And the large groups did not all run their affairs in an exact same manner. And within even the larger groups, I'm not going to really speculate how many, but there were smaller groups within the larger groups even. And within the smaller groups, there would be certain variations in the particular way, let's say, that they loped along, that some of the groups, the smaller groups, would be inclined to, when it got cold, to head east, and some would head west. Some seemed to favor short grass more than tall grass. There were small variations, not enough to in any way distinguish any of them as being anything other than cows. They began to think, or what we would call thinking. They began to develop what we would, if we had been there to observe it, would refer to as an intellect. And from an outside observation, the intellect seemed to be reflective, that is, their speech, the way they talk to one another. It's the only thing we have to go by, since you can't read the minds of cows, unlike humans. But so all we had to judge it by, or all we would have, would be their speech. And if you observe their speech, it would appear then that the cows began to, after the intellect developed, as witnessed by them speaking, that they began to, judge by their speech, remember, that they began to feel themselves individually even more distinctly removed from certain other cow groups than they had before they began to speak. Remember, because I told you, even when they were just cows, they did show. If we were an outside observer and we could hover over the planet and looked at them, they did display certain traits, not much on an individual level. But if we took the full population of the planet, X number of cows populated the planet, and we divided the full total, that if I said that they were, I'm just making this up, 24 large divisions, in other words, 24 large herds that covered the earth. And the 24 stayed enough separate from one another that you could look down and observe that even though sometimes they would get close together and perhaps mingle for God knows what, a party or bar mitzvah or something. But normally you could, if you were hovering over the planet, you could look down and observe that there were a couple of dozen large herds, and they seemed to stay rather intact. And then if you observed a little bit more within these, let's say 24 herds, that within each herd you could look down and perhaps see another couple of dozen or more smaller herds, cliques we'd probably call them, within the herds. But they were still just generally cows. And that's as small as you could see it, would be cliques within the larger herds. But we're still talking about sizable numbers of cows. But once they began to think, they began to speak, and then let's assume that we could overhear them, not only hover over the planet and see what was going on, but we could overhear them. They then began to speak as though, increasingly, in a manner that would lead you to believe that each cow had now become distinctly individualistic from his, generally speaking, his fellow cows. That cows in one of the large herds, based on their speech, which is a reflection of their thinking, remember, that the individual cows in one of the large of the 24 herds would really feel themselves separate from the cows in the other herds, based on their speech. If we just listen, you could hear them discuss the other cows, the other herds. And to a lesser degree, you could hear, if we picked out a specific cow in one herd, in one faction, within a herd, you would hear that one cow, perhaps to a lesser degree, but speak in ways that distinguished him, that showed that he considered himself distinguishable from either other cows in his herd. If you could picture, if that was water, that's the top of the water, of course. this is the position that we're in on this planet. That from the neck down, everyone is in the same position, more or less. You can consider the size of the ocean on this planet, if you want to consider it all just one big ocean. And you know that it's uneven, it's different depths. The bottoms of the ocean, the floor is of unequal terrain. In certain areas at certain times, the movement of the water, the waves, the tides, show different characteristics. Some of the waters are colder, certain parts of the planet, than other areas. But everything considered, if you were living from the neck down in water, if everybody on this planet was standing actually in water up to our necks, all around the planet, then even taking into consideration the different consistency, the different makeup of the bottom on which you stood, the different kinds of currents and tides that were going on one part of the planet as opposed to another, and even a different water temperature, I assume that you see that if you ask humans, if you look down on all the humans and you rode by, so assume you had a rowboat, and you rode around checking all these little heads sticking up, and you talked to them about how life was from the neck down, I suggest most strongly, I think you would have to agree, being the silent, acquiescent audience that you are, that people would feel, the general comment would just be, well, I'm living underwater. In other words, their first comment, and it would satisfy people, I suggest to you, it would satisfy a description of their position, would be simply to say, well, I'm living underwater like everyone else. That individuals would not feel the need to say, well, I'm living underwater, but it is very rocky down here, and I have heard that some people are standing on sandy bottoms, or right here I feel that the tide continues from my position to run too rapidly, or that there are certain currents here that whip around my ankles in ways that are counterproductive or in conflict with the way in which the tide hits me somewhere around the thighs. I'm not sure you're following this, but the point is, I'm just saying that if you ask people, if you said, is this a satisfactory, if we were, let me change it over, instead of the planet of cows, let's assume that now it was a cow or some other extraordinary creature was flying over this planet, and it looked down on humans and it said, it appears all you people are living underwater from the neck down. And all the heads went, yeah. You go, well, if I go home and report that, as far as from the neck down, is that a satisfactory explanation? Well, you people, if I go back to my home planet and say from the neck down, everybody on that planet is living underwater, would that be a satisfactory explanation? Would I be shortchanging anyone? I'm suggesting to you, everybody go, no, that's about it. You know, that is a fair description. We're all living underwater. Do you understand that everybody is born from the neck down living underwater? In the metaphorical sense I mean this, or if it's not that, it's a literal sense, and we're all greatly blinded and distracted and can't see what's going on, so it's one of the two. So I'm either speaking metaphorically or not. That from the neck down, the way in which you're born is due to the pressing circumstances of living underwater. That physically, everyone is made in such a way that there is almost no room, nothing to speak of, for a person to change. Because you've got to understand the difficulties. And I'm not going into them. Just imagine if your head is out of water, that your head is living as we believe we're living now. But from the neck down, you're an aqua creature. It requires very specialized physical construction and functions to live there. Well, screw all that. Let me just tell you. Underwater, the differences between people across this planet is negligible. Underwater, from the neck down, the changes that a person can make is negligible. The only thing you can do is, from the neck down, there are gyms underwater. So you can build up your muscles, you can run, you can make your thighs bigger, you can do all of that. But here's what you can't do. You cannot get out of the water. No matter how strong you get, you're going to live and die underwater. You're going to live and die as an awkward creature. No matter what you do. No matter what you do. From the neck up, things appear to be otherwise. From the neck up, people believe otherwise. From the neck up, when they turn to each other and they hold discussions, their discussions lead them to the irrefutable, it seems, conclusion that change is possible. People turn to each other and they can say almost anything. Strike almost. One head can turn to another head. Remember, if we're looking at the planet, all we see are heads in little waves. You see 6 billion heads. The heads can turn to one another and say, I always want to say what I did, almost anything. It seems to make people, when you give people a cushion, when you build some kind of tolerance into the machinery of things, when you give all good rats the illusion of a hole somewhere, they like it better. Just in case they get trapped, they think, well, I can always go run in the hole. The heads can turn and say almost anything. 2 heads can be there above the water and one turn to another one and say, hi, what's your name? And one head can say, my name is Professor Alfonso de Crepfo. And it might not be. I don't know. The other head doesn't know. They can say, oh, really? And the first head can even say, well, I've heard of you, which could be a lie. But he can say that. And the first head, or the head that answered, who let's assume that he made up that name, it's not his real name. And he says, really? You've actually heard of me? Another head says, yes. They could both be just making it up. Who knows? And one head can say, have you been here long? The other head said, no, I just arrived here yesterday. I used to live on the other side of the world. He goes, really? Yeah. He can say, you seem like a learned man. Oh, yes, I have 5 degrees. Really? Oh, yes. Very impressive. It may or may not be impressive, but the head can say anything. The heads can also do this. They can discuss. I hate to get into this. I tried my best not to. The heads can even discuss what's going on below the waterline. And at first you would think, well, that's a simple matter to see. In other words, one man could say, I'm not going to give you a specific example. You people got brains of your own. But one of the heads can say to another of the heads, blah, 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 having to do with his being below the waterline. They can say, have you ever blah, 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 or by any chance are you blah, 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 blah. And the other head go, oh, yes, blah, 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 blah. Now, you just got to fill it in. You can imagine I have nothing particular in mind. It's just I don't want to say anything specific. But one of the heads, let's say, ask the other head next to him a question having to do with activities below the waterline. His activities. That he asks him a question like, do you ever, or are you, blah, blah, blah. And the other head goes, yes, I am. And now let's assume that yes, I am is the incorrect answer, that he's lying. And so you can say, well, now we're getting somewhere. Because one head can tell another head his name, and who knows whether it's true. But if one head asks the other one, remember, I'm not going to say what it is, but one head asks another one, referring to matters below the waterline. He goes to one head to another, by any chance are you blah, blah, blah? Another head goes, oh yes, blah, blah, blah. And let's just say, for the matter of this example, that that's a lie. You know what a lie is. So, if I present this to you, being an outside observer, you hadn't been here yet, you would say, well, now, we're getting somewhere because that's easily provable or unprovable. The heads have got to stay above the water. See, because you thought, well, just the guy that asked the question, like, well, is so-and-so true about you? Is such and such? And the head goes, yes, it's true, and I'm saying it's not, or the guy doubts it, the first head. So you would think, well, all he's got to do is go, and put his head underwater and look and see. The head can't go underwater. I'll tell you something else strange. Nobody ever even thought to try. Of course, if you're really sharp then, well, if you're a sharp ass, a smart aleck, you could say, well, in that case, then I could be wrong in saying that the heads can't go underwater, because if no one's ever tried, how do we know whether they can't? I rest my case. The heads cannot prove or disprove anything. The closest thing that we normally refer to as reality, or being able to actually prove something. That is, such as in the last example of one head asking another head a question about matters having to do with the other head's below water existence. And he says, bah, 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 or ask him, another head says, yes. Which I'm saying, the other head has no way of knowing, because it cannot look. And then I said, the head cannot go into water. But then I said, no one's ever thought to try. And then I said that you could say, well, in that case, you don't know whether they can go underwater or not if they've never tried. What the hell do you want? Is anybody listening? There is one thing that can be proven, or one way that anything can be proven. The first guy, the first head, asks the second head, blah, 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 blah. He's asking him a question about matters below the waterline. And the second head goes, yes, or no, whatever it is. And the first head, the questioning head, if he has some doubt, here's what he can do. Is below the water, he can try and kick the other guy, and best he can with his hands or his feet is to find out. But he can't put his head under there and look. He can try to do this, whatever the question was. Is this going over as well as night before last? I won't be insulting enough to ask anyone how far you're trying to consider that this might have some allegorical significance, application to you as an individual. Oh, it would be far too insulting for me to even ask, even rhetorically. What if that wasn't an allegory? It would seem that parts of it have to be about living underwater, but screw all that for a moment. What if that was not an allegory, and what if that was our condition? That the heads can move around, and heads can talk to one another on this planet. And the heads can say anything. The heads can tell fantastic tales. In case I didn't make my first example fantastic enough, one head can tell another head. He can say, by the way, I just flew here from another universe. And the second head got no way of knowing. Due to conversations the second head may have had all these years, and due to the fact that it's never moved from its spot, more or less, might give it some impetus to doubt the first story's head, but there's no way it can disprove it. Also, the first head, if you think that's too strange, Of course, that's not all that strange, by the way. And I don't mean just the fishermen in Mississippi with their claims of alien contacts. How about people that say they're sent by God? But if you think all that's too strange, how about one head tells another head? And now he's talking about from the head down. But see, people do not specify this. Notice that no one speaks. No one says, well, I'm about to say something, but it's only applicable from the neck down. They do not say that. But it is an operation. Just because you don't see the water and just because you don't see the situation visibly, or you don't see it visually, doesn't mean it does not exist. But here is, in case you think head saying it came from another universe, it's too strange. One head can turn to another head and make an absolutely fallacious statement about itself from the water down, and not perhaps as crudely as I may have led you to believe when I said that the closest it could come to some proof would be underwater, is one person underwater from here down try to feel the other person and make some sense out of whatever their inquiry was. Underwater, there's more than just the body going on. One head can turn to another head and say, I am probably, in this part of the ocean, the most compassionate person you've ever seen. I love my fellow fish, man. I love my fellow man so much that at times it hurts. And the other head. I still wish, is everybody picturing 6 billion heads, this planet covered in water, and it's just heads showing. And this one head says, my concern, my love for my fellow man is such that at times I feel as though my heart is being ripped from my very chest cavity. And he looks right at this head next to him and says that. Remember, it's just 2 heads. Another head goes, the other head the same way as the first head saying, I came from another planet. What's the second head left to do? I mean, you got a full range, you're human. They can believe it, not believe it, ignore it, look away. They can do whatever heads want to do. One head can turn to another head, and not just in a, let's make it less non-personal. One head can turn to another head and go, I've been watching you, and I will tell you what, I feel a great deal of personal affection for you. The other head, what are you going to do? That first head, see, here's what people never think about. The first head, when I said that I assumed it was a little too strong to leave as one example. 2 heads. One head turns to another and says, hi. I says, hi. He says, I just got here from another planet. Now that's, normally speaking, we all agree, that is not the general run of conversation. That is not what 2 normally sane people would expect, or one normally sane person would expect coming from what he assumed was another normal sane person. So that sounds that that's too much. But also notice this, the head that was told that has got no way to prove or disprove. Think about it. That's long enough. I don't know what you're thinking about. What are you trying to do? Go into some kind of, trying to search your memory for what you knew about the theoretical laws of physics and space travel? It's a glaring fact. The second head can say anything it wants to, like, well, that's impossible and we all know it. Now, boy, there's a scientific. It's a simple fact. The second head, if one head turns around and says, hi, hi, I just got here, I came from another planet. There is no way the second head can prove or disprove. It has no way of knowing. None. And if you think otherwise, then I don't know why you call yourself able to think. Because you're not. The only thing it can do, it could turn to somebody else and go, well, I don't believe it. Hey, that's a head's privilege. Or it can say it's impossible. And you say, well, why? They go, well, everybody knows it is. You're in the same position. It has no way of knowing. But, as I said, that appears to be rather far-fetched, and you probably don't see any even in purpose for me to bring it up. But now let's get into something else that is common and everyday. One head turns to another one, says hi. Another head says hi. The first head says, I've been watching you, I hope you didn't mind, but I wanted to come over and tell you there's something, I just feel a great deal of personal affection for you, and I want you to know it, and I want you to know if I come up with a good business deal or some good stock, some insight. I just want you to know I really like you. I mean, I'm serious. I have not said that since my father died. Anything. All right, now that goes on constantly. Everybody does that. Or he could, contrarily, go over and say, I don't like you. But let's leave it at the first example. Does the head have any way of knowing what the first head, the second head, having any way of proving one way or the other what the first head said, any more so than he does if the first head said, I'm from another planet? What's the difference? The difference with ordinary people is that they don't know. Ordinary people wouldn't put up with this. If they would, it'd be good for them. But see, no one ever questions the fact that someone talks to you about their feelings or what's going on from the neck down underwater. But you think, well, their feelings are right here. It's not, their feelings are here. I don't know. If somebody says they like me, I guess they do. Well, what's the difference in that and the person says that they're from another planet? Well, that's not possible. You know that for a fact. It's not possible. Well, as close as possible. I know it is a fact. Well, how do you know for a fact just because somebody comes up and smiles and the head says, hi, I like you, and I'll do it. I want you to know, count me as one of your great friends or whatever. You go, well, I got no reason not to believe it. No, that isn't what I asked. How do you know he's true? How do you know that that's true? No one ever questions it. Well, circumstances can be such when it gets down usually to a matter of visible objects, normally read wealth, possessions, coming into question, then somebody might begin to doubt. There's somebody trying to swindle me, steal something. But as long as it's not dealing with visible items, that just someone expresses their feelings to you, they might as well be saying, I have feelings that come from another planet. Which, see, we've already established that first story, that I came from another planet, all sane people will dismiss. But they will accept almost anything else. I won't be so insulting to ask anybody if you have thought about the fact that I still haven't changed it, the whole intent as a metaphorical telling of you, an individual, having nothing to do between two heads and two people. Oh, it does, it applies. That's of no consequence. It all has to do with you. Do you consider that you could look out if we didn't live underwater, or if you've got the kind of eyesight that you can see underwater, so that you can see the heads and from the neck down, and to realize that quite easily we could split up the world again into humans who say, when they talk about their relationship to life and their life, that tend to say, I feel so-and-so, and that the other part say, I think so-and-so. And if there are people who seem, by their own expression, and if you observe it a certain way, that they feel. They be all sorts of things to say about them if they were one big herd. If we just, for the sake of this, divide up all of humanity in these two large herds of those who say, I feel, and those about themselves, the life they lead, the way that they interpret what happens to them, is that one large herd says, well, I feel so-and-so, I feel so-and-so, I feel this way about that. Or somebody asks them a direct question, they say, well, I would feel that the answer is yes. And there are other people who say, well, I think so-and-so. You ask them about other people, well, I think such and such about them. You ask them about some activity that's going on, they'll go, well, I think so-and-so. Also in these two large herds, you could look at from the neck down their behavior in a certain way. And those who say they feel, they seem to take no thought for the consequences of what they do. They seem to sort of, as it's called colloquially, roll with the punches of life. They don't seem that upset about this or that. They seem to love good food and sex, sleeping, doing nothing. You can't get them much involved with theoretical discussions about the purpose of life. It just seems to be, well, I feel like you just have to do the best you can. I feel like you just kind of live, and that's that. The other group considers that if you do not think about what you're doing, that you're missing part of life or that you are not living life correctly. I won't be so insulting to ask, even within the last 2 minutes, if any of you have not realized that we're still talking about, allegorically, you individually. What if you got so fast that instead of talking to other heads above the water, that you could go and talk to yourself? That you could move so quickly. And by the way, quickly, if you consider the possibility there's another dimension right here next to ours running parallel, I could tell you that quickly in this other dimension, if there was one, I'm just making this up, that quickly is more on the order of measured, determined action. And a head next to me said, but that's almost an antonym or an anatomos. No, it would be here. But quickly is one thing. Measured, determined action, at least by connotation, well, by definition, measured, deliberate, thoughtful, reflective. That is just about the opposite from saying quickly. But see, that's why I said it's in another dimension. So if you could quickly enough, I was going to do it the old joke, rather than having to do that, is to say, if you could do it this quickly, and then say, did I do it too fast? You could talk to your own head. But then you've got to understand that quickly has other possible definitions, that being measured, determined action. If you could talk to your own head, who could fool you? I guess somebody, I'll go ahead and say it, somebody could say, well, hell, if separate heads can fool each other, then you could fool yourself. In fact, that's a known psychological reality, that people fool themselves. Did I do it too quick? Say I did it. If you're a one-headed creature, then I'll grant you what they're saying, that's possible to fool yourself. But I already told you what I've been talking about for the last 45 minutes is not separate heads of these two heads talking to each other. It's an allegory for one person. And it's only on that basis that you can say, I'm from another planet. And you go, really? Still too strong for you? You're walking along or staying in a street corner, you glance up in the plate glass window and you go, you know, I'm not, when the light's just right, I'm a fairly handsome guy. In your other head, you go, well, I don't think so, but I got no way to disprove it. Every time you speak, your two heads, I'm talking about under automatic everyday circumstances. Anytime you go, the subject's being discussed, question comes up and you go, well, I'm the kind of guy that, you got two heads. One of them says, hi. Says, I'm from another planet. Really? You still think that's too strange? You don't see. Somebody says, well, yeah, I guess you could say that about me. Whatever the hell that was, it might as well be saying, I believe that you might be from Pluto. Yeah, I guess you could say that. You always struck me as being a very compassionate kind of guy under that rough exterior. Yeah, you got me. You might as well be saying, I'm from Mars. That is fooling yourself. That is what ordinary people say, well, a man can fool himself. But see, that's when you're operating at the ordinary level. When you deliberately talk to yourself, then these ideas that you fool yourself are no longer true, because you have now established a head that does not exist. For those of you that don't see any connection between my story last time of the city and everyone living where the light was being produced, and then some people who moved away from that area, got away from it, and what they discovered. When you can produce your own new head, which is really doing that, it's not physically producing a new head that's visible, but when you can do that, to carry on with my foolishness here, my allegory, you cannot fool yourself in the way in which people ordinarily say it. That's really of no consequence. It doesn't even arise. It's not a possibility, and that's not why you do it. But the new head has no interest in the story of the old head. The old head can say, hi, I'm from another planet. And to the new head, you might as well be saying, hi, I'm from another planet, but I'm a mad dog killer to make up for it. Or I can say, hi, I'm from another planet, but I haven't gotten here yet, and my mother died day before yesterday while I was still part of a Sherman tank. Oh, and I'm going to kill you as soon as I get the chance. Same thing. In that sense, is what ordinary people believe, that a person can fool himself. Forget somebody else fooling you. But that they believe a person can fool himself. The new head has no preference for what the other head says. It has no interest in what it says. And that's why I said it was really sort of unbecoming to the new head for me to say that it can't be fooled. The idea of being fooled doesn't exist. What's to be fooled by noise? When the people got outside the area of the city where the light was being produced, one of the things they discovered, remember I gave you two things they discovered. One was that they didn't know, but there was a continuing noise being created, or some kind of byproduct of the light being produced. The story tonight, the new head above the water, everything else that's going on is noise. How can you believe or not believe noise? What, are you an idiot? You hear noise. Am I going to have to do it? All right, was that true or false? Come on now, you people are educated. Now, do you believe that or not? Is that foolish enough for me to end on and point out to you that right there is the basis? That is about the full repertoire of everything that passes between ordinary human minds and in your own ordinary thinking. Is a continual discussion of, don't look at it, it's not visual, but and being the intelligent sort you are, you're going, huh, I don't know. There might be some validity to that. I mean, if we expanded on it, I'm going to have to consider, I need more information maybe, or else you might just say, oh, you know, screw that, boy, I'm sick of that shit. Would anybody buy into this possible brand new on-the-spot description that being enlightened, being awakened, being liberated would be that you recognize noise when you hear it?